guys, welcome back to the homestead. So I was gifted some beef fat from a dear friend of mine who asked that I do a video to show my process on how I render down the beef fat into tallow. Mind you, you're going to want to start with this you're going to want your fat cold, not frozen, but cold. Usually I take it straight from the freezer, let it sit in the fridge, and then that next day I have it's cold enough that cutting it, you don't get all slimy. You know how the fat will get slimy after a while. I highly recommend making sure that when you do this process that it is grass fed only. Yes, you can use grain fed. I'm not a fan of grain fed in tallow. I think it carries an odor with it, as to where the grass fed, while it has an odor, it's not as pungent. So you can actually tell the difference between grass fed and grain fed. And it just depends on what you're going to use it for. If you're going to cook with it and just fry with it, or whatever your purpose for it is, then grain fed might be okay. For me, a lot of my tallow goes into my personal care products. Now, of course, if I'm making something for the store, I use tallow that's ordered, so that way it's been tested and we know it's okay, because we don't want to just be slathering up with unknown cows. But in this process, mine is mainly for that purpose, because I do like a lot of tallow on my skin, because tallow actually is the closest thing that mimics the rejuvenation process, just like with human collagen and stuff like that. So if you're gonna lather yourself up in something, grass-fed tallow is the way to go. So I have this all chopped up, and you'll be able to see it makes a decent amount. I'm thinking starting out with about 8 pounds. I think that's what we weighed at when Rachel and I spoke. So it has now chopped up into a lovely bit. Now, I have seen person after person after person say you have to add water. I have never added water in my tallow process. I'm not saying they're wrong. It's your kitchen. You do what you're comfortable with. And a lot of the time they do that because they don't want it to burn, right? Because when the tallow burns, that's when a lot of that scent comes out, but you don't want to transfer over into your oil, especially if you're going to use it for pastries or something like that. Not everybody uses tallow for those purposes. I will use butter before I use tallow any day of the week, just because I prefer butter. But for the tallow rendering purposes itself, there's a lot of other good properties you can get from it. So I wanted to show you guys my process, because again, I don't add water. To me, anytime I add water to fats, you kind of can up your chances of it being rancid. And this is kind of how the Amish showed me. We used to process a bunch of their beef. We used to process, back when I ate pork, we did a bunch of their pork, and how they actually turned, the fats into the oils. They never dumped water on it. They didn't care to dump water on it. The key to it, though, is low and slow. So you're going to want it warm enough that it doesn't turn on your countertop while you're waiting. And really, the beef fat itself should have very little odor to it whatsoever. If you've got a strong odor in there, I don't know if I would turn that one into tallow. I mean, like, you'll know. There'll be a difference. You'll be like, this almost smells rancid. So it just depends on how old your beef fat is. Maybe something could have gone wrong in your freezer. So just make sure that you're not rendering down something that already smells rancid from the start, or has any weird consistencies to it. You're also going to want to make sure that all of the meat, as much as possible, is cut off of it, because the meat will actually give it that burnt flavor, which is not what you're going for here, right? We're trying to make a clean tallow that we can use for just about whatever we want. So I usually do mine in the roaster. You can do it in the crock pot if you have a very small process and a way to regulate your heat very nicely on a gas stove. My electric stove doesn't do it very well, but a gas stove, you can regulate that heat a lot better. So you can do a smaller process in a smaller pot. It just depends on how much beef you get, right? If you get how much fat you get. You get a whole cow, you're going to have a lot more fat, right, than you would have if you got a quarter. So you have to change your process for how much fat that you have. But again, the key is just making sure that it is cold to start with. So with this process, I found my roaster is kind of the best way to go. And you really just almost want to just turn it on. And so that's going to be right under 200 degrees in your process for your roaster. If you're going to do it on a stovetop, you're going to want to do it on a low, medium heat. Again, the key is you want to make sure that the fat is cooking at an even level, and you're coming back and stirring, and make sure when you stir it, use stainless steel or use wood. Please do not put plastics into this. It's fat. They do absorb, right? Fat absorbs all the chemicals. So you want to make sure that you're doing this process at a very slow go. If you start to see it's cooking way too fast, almost like if you saw the schmatz video of where I was turning that chicken skin into fat, you're not going to want it to cook that fast. That was almost too fast for what we were doing. But I'm going to show you through this process. This usually takes, you're going to want to make sure that you have a lot of time, because when you start this from start to finish, it can take up to 4 to 5 hours, depending on how much fat you have, right? The smaller amount of fat you have, less time it's going to take. So I'm going to get this going, and then once she really gets to a point of where it's starting to kind of render down a little bit, I'll come back and I'll show you guys what that looks like.
Okay, we're just going to do a quick checking, guys, to show you, but it's been going for about an hour now. I got the temperature between 250 and 300 if you're doing it in the roaster. And you see it's slow. It's starting to kind of, you see some of the pieces are starting to warm up and turn to gel. So we're just going to keep it at this consistency and keep going. And I'm stirring about every 20 or 30 minutes, or as I pass through the kitchen, just to make sure nothing's sticking and nothing burning, so I can regulate my heat. Okay, just to give you guys an update, this is kind of where we're at now. We're at like the 2-hour mark. Like I said, I do mine very slow. In this slow process, it kind of cuts down on all the extra flavors, and it makes a milder tallow when it's done, if you're going to eat it. So again, I'm just going to kind of let this keep cooking. Haven't adjusted my temperature at all because nothing appears to be sticking, so we're good. And when this is getting a little bit closer, we'll come back, but I just wanted to give you an update. So from here, the pieces will just get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So again, just kind of updating you guys on the process. We're now about 4 hours in. Like I said, I just do it really slow. I mean, you can up the heat a little bit if you want to, and cook it faster. But the reason I go so slow personally is because I don't want a lot of the smell from the fat to actually be in the oil. So we'll just keep stirring. Okay guys, so this has finished rendering down. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to scoop out the leftover cracklings, and then I'm going to show you how I pour from there, but I'm going to have to change the camera view. But I wanted y'all to see the finished product.
Okay guys, so like I said, I'm going to now start to take all these cracklings out. And what I usually do, let me find a better place to set this down. But what I usually do is I have another spoon sitting nearby to kind of press all the excess. This is one of those processes that you kind of have to work a little fast with it. I don't turn my heat off right away. That's why I pull it just a little bit before they get super crunchy. But I'm just going to take it and press all these down to kind of squeeze out the extra fat. So I'm going to finish this up and get it to where it's just the grease or the tallow left in the pan, and then I'll show you the next step in the process. Okay, so I've got most of the larger chunks out, and then I took what was in the bowl and just kind of tilted it, because I've got a colander set up with a funnel, and then I've got, of course, my famous coffee filter. And I find that coffee filter actually filters it the best. Apparently my tongue stopped working at some point today. But then I'm just going to tilt my roasting pan, and then I just take my measuring cup, and then I'll just take it and pour it in. And this is just kind of to control the pour. So I make sure I'm not making too much of a mess. And then if your basket starts to fill up, of course you can always take it, press it down with your spoon, and then dump it in your container and start over. And you're just going to repeat this process. And like I said, I set it up this way. For me, it's just easier because I'm ultimately going to put it in my pan over here, which I've lined with parchment paper to let it cool. For a couple reasons, if I needed to render it back down again, I'm not scooping it out of a jar. It's a lot easier to cut it and melt it. There's out there that have other ways of doing it, but I just prefer this way because this way I don't have to wait for water to cook out. I don't have to worry about it burning because I can control the temperature. And you'll find the parchment paper is awesome. And there we go. Now I'm going to wait for this to cool, and when this cools, I'll come back and show you the final product.
So I just wanted to show you guys, now that it's in the pan, it's cooling, and look, not a drop of crumb or impurity or anything else. I mean, it's so clear you can see the design on the bottom of the pan, which is kind of what I want to go for. Like I said, like adding all that water and doing all those extra steps, to me, it just doesn't seem efficient for time. So I'm going to let this finish harden up, and then I'll come back and I'll show you.
Hey guys, so I let this end up cooling overnight because it actually finished pretty late and I had to do dinner, and then I was just like, ugh, I'm tired. So I let this cool overnight because I didn't want to pull it out, too soon and ruin it. So all I'm going to do now, take the lid off of my container, and then it comes out so nicely. And it's pretty hard. Now, at this point, if you wanted to, and there wasn't a drop of imperfection in this at all, which was kind of nice. So if you wanted to at this point, because you know it's clean and you know that there's nothing in it that needs to be scraped off, I mean, as you can see, I mean, it's perfect. There's nothing on it. And that's what I'm saying. You don't necessarily have to do the whole water method if you don't want to. I'm not saying they're wrong. That's fine the way they're doing it. It's just not the way I was taught to do it. I prefer not to put waters with fats. So all I'm going to do now is cut it into usable chunks and put it in my glass jar. You can put it in mason jars, right? So if you wanted to at this stage, if you thought if you filtered it the way that you needed to, so there was no impurities or anything left in it. That's what I'm saying. Those coffee filters, I mean, they're so ridiculously cheap and reusable. I have my basket of ones that I use for things that I eat, and then I've got stuff for the herb ones, and I mean, it really just cuts out on so much extra, so much cleaning, so much everything, right? And then you don't have also all the residue and particles and everything in your herbs or your tallows or your chicken fat or whatever you're rendering down. So if you wanted to at that point, you could pour it into a mason jar. And I've done it that way in the past. And of course, cap it off. You can vacuum seal it. If you wanted to, you can stick it in your fridge, whatever you're comfortable with. I find with the mason jar, there's a lot of loss, right? You're using your spatula to try to get as much out of the jar as you can. Not to mention, sometimes your hand is like this deep in the jar. Now your whole hand's covered in oil. So what I prefer to do is I will just take it and I will just cut it into usable chunks, almost like butter, if you will. And then I just put it in my jars. Whoop. Sometimes it breaks, that's okay. So again, this is just about getting it into a container. Like I said, if you wanted to take it and pour it straight into the mason jars, you could. But for me, like if I was going to use it, it's easier to just come in and cut, a chunk off of what I'm going to use. And then I don't have to stick my hand all down in the mason jar. So, uses for tallow. A lot of people cook with it. I will always choose butter over tallow. Maybe it's the Southern girl in me, I don't know, but I prefer butter. You of course can use it in soaps. You can use it, it's been used as machine oil. If you render it down like this, there's like no odor to it. And that's what people don't understand. Like tallow really gets an odor to it. One, I found if it's grain fed. Two, and I mean like heavily grain fed, not like grain finished. But the other thing that can cause kind of the impurities is you're cooking it too hot, too fast, and you end up burning your cracklings, which ultimately transfers over into the taste of your tallow as well. But it's very mild. So in that case, when you render it this slow and you get it this mild, well, you can melt it down and use it for lantern fuel, right? Animal fats were used for lantern fuel for a long time. Let's see if I can get this one in here. So there's a lot of good uses for tallow. I know it's kind of like, the hip thing now. Everything's got tallow in it, tallow this, tallow that. But there's more use for it than lotions and other stuff. You can find more practical uses. I've even seen online where people use it as like oil for, their weapons and stuff. So this is just kind of my process on it. Like I said, the other processes are fine too. I'm not saying they're wrong, but I wanted to show a different method. There is a way of rendering down tallow so it's low odor, low to no impurities, and it really comes down to your filtering system. Those cracklings, when you're done, if you want to, you can fry them up even more and make almost like a beef crunchy like skin type complexity. But I don't, every time I eat them they make me sick, so I don't do it. I usually cook them down a little bit more and then they go out for the chicken stuff as like kitchen scraps. I'm sure there's other things you can do with them as well. I haven't invested the time. If it comes down to eating beef fat or chicken skin, I'll probably pick chicken skin any day of the week. So for me, this is very simple, very easy, just using the roasting pan. Like I said, you can transfer this method over and use it on a stovetop, just making sure that you regulate your heat so you don't burn the cracklings. Here's the thing. If you do burn the cracklings because you're new at this, you have not ruined the tallow. Just when you cook with it, it is going to taste like beef. So if you do happen to burn a lot, that would be one that I would put in a mason jar and I would put on top like, chicken fried steak or, outside lantern use or, whatever. Just make sure and it'll actually turn out a little browner too. So you'll know that you burned the cracklings. When you get this white consistency to it, you haven't burned your cracklings. So this was my process. This is how I do it. This is how I've always done it. So I just wanted to show you guys. I appreciate you guys stopping by. I hope you found this informative and entertaining, if nothing else, and have a great day.